You're listening to the Frame of Mind podcast.
Shall we begin?
I'm not in the right frame of mind.
Welcome to the very first Frame of Mind podcast, where we discuss mental health in cinema and television and how it is portrayed. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do you need to know about mental health? I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a screenwriter as well as a professor of screenwriting, and I'm joined by my brother, a general and forensic psychiatrist, Joshua Jones. Today we're going to look at the Iron Claw. So we're going to talk about depression, suicide, and just how impressively jacked Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White got. All the really important stuff when it comes to mental health and Shred Town. Okay, so Josh, you wanted to start with a quick disclaimer?
Yeah, Jeff. So, hey, folks, the information expressed in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing expressed in this podcast is medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is created. And of course, and we'll mention this several times throughout the podcast, if you or someone you know is suicidal or experiencing a severe mental health crisis, please call or text the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number at 988. That is 988.
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about early on was the real Von Ehrlich family. And you had mentioned that in your research, one of the suicides of the family wasn't even shown in the movie. Like that's how much suicide and depression affected the family. And I thought that was really fascinating. They chose not to just even include one of the suicides.
Yeah, so the blurb I read was that the writers and producers of the film thought that there was so much trauma already in the movie that they didn't even mention him as a character, another brother that did end up commit suicide. Now, I mean, I think it's important for us to say we're going to be talking today about the characters in the Iron Claw, and this is based on the Von Ehrlich family, but obviously we don't know the Von Ehrlich family. I've never examined any of them, wouldn't be able to talk about it if I could, and so we're going to be talking about these fictionalized characters. I certainly hope that if any family, including the Von Ehrlichs, happen to have the amount of trauma that family did have, that those folks would be going and getting professional help, because, man, there is a ton of trauma portrayed in this movie.
Yeah, and one of the things they talked about early on, was sort of an ongoing theme in the movie, was the family curse.
Ever since I was a child, people said my family was cursed. Mom tried to protect us with God. Pop tried to protect us with wrestling.
He's in me now. He's got a hold of me.
And I thought that was really interesting. And obviously it kept coming up throughout the movie. But you said that is a typical feeling that depressed people have.
Yeah, so I mean, depression has been around since ancient times. We've recognized it as a condition, as a disease, and it does run in families. I mean, there is a genetic component to depression, and this was recognized, centuries ago. And I will still hear some family members talk about how they've gotten the family curse, depression, melancholia, the noonday demon, whatever they want to call it. It clusters in families. There's a genetic component, and yeah, people talk about the curse. And I thought it was really, really interesting in the movie where Kevin, Zac Efron's character, after he had a kid, he started to get really, really into the fact that there's this curse and didn't want to pass the curse on to his son, and then even started to show even more symptoms of depression by pulling back and isolating from his wife and his son, even saying, I don't want him to get it, as if it's some communicable disease.
Totally.
But that kind of that kind of overemphasis on guilt and overemphasis on something that I'm going to do to my family is a hallmark of depression. And you see that in families where it is, where it's known as the curse.
Yeah, what's wild about the movie is I don't even know if they used the word depression. They certainly talk about the family curse. And obviously, there was an issue of suicide. Talk about the relationship between depression and suicide.
Yeah, I think it's important to know kind of what depression is. I think we throw that term around very casually in our society. Depression is more than just sadness, and I think a lot of people think, oh, if you're sad, especially folks who haven't experienced clinical depression or major depressive disorder, which is more than just sadness. It's a heightening of sadness to the point where it's almost a numb feeling that has to affect people for more than 2 weeks at a time. But it comes with a whole lot of other symptoms, including inability to concentrate, intense feelings of guilt. It messes up your appetite. It messes up your sleep. It's just, it's a terrible disease, and it is extremely common. When I say depression as a psychiatrist, I'm typically thinking of major depressive disorder, but depression comes as a symptom cluster in a whole bunch of other diseases, including bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder has many depressive features, an adjustment reaction to some significant trauma or stressor. So depression is kind of omnipresent in psychiatry. And you asked about its relationship to suicide. It absolutely increases your risk for suicide, although there are lots of other spheres of psychiatry and mental health that also will increase your risk of depression. But that's kind of the number one thing we look for when we start to look at somebody with depression. That's the biggest risk, is that it's going to cascade upon itself over and over and over in that person's head and lead them to thoughts of suicide, and then ultimately. But there's got to
be a massive road between being depressed and being suicidal. And I've been as you well know, and why I really want to do this podcast. I've been diagnosed as bipolar 2, so I've had depressive episodes. And I didn't know that I was, suffering depressive episodes. What are the things that people should look for? Obviously once you get to the point where you're thinking about killing yourself, that you're far down the road of depression. But what are the things that people can look for early that can differentiate between I'm sad right now and I might be, fighting depression?
Yeah, it's super insidious. It creeps up on you. And I think with the thing that's really striking about all mental illness is that mental illnesses are really a kind of a heightening or an exacerbation or a corruption of sensations and emotions that we feel already. So everybody feels sad. And so this is where it sneaks up on you, because as you said, where does it change from sadness to depression? And where we really start to think of it changing from sadness to depression is if it's lasted for more than 2 weeks and it's really starting to impact your functioning in some way. If it's starting to impact your relationships, starting to impact your job. We've categorized mental illnesses, including depression, using symptoms. So if you have sad feelings, if you're hopeless, if you're helpless, if you start to have thoughts of suicide, these are all hallmarks of depression. I think it's less important to get into the nitty-gritty of how do you diagnose depression and more that what are the warning signs. And absolutely a warning sign is if you're starting to think about suicide, if anybody's starting to think about wanting to be dead or wanting to disappear, that's the time to reach out and get help. I have major depressive disorder myself, as Jeff, as you know, and as our listeners will get to know, and it's just so it's so terrifying when you finally think to yourself, okay, there's something wrong, and I need to get help. And I think you didn't see that with the Von Erichs in the movie.
Yeah, certainly the families they're portrayed, I don't think that they could have possibly admitted to themselves or anybody else that they were depressed. And again, that's just how it was portrayed in the movie. But that last scene where he's crying in front of his children, he's like, oh, men shouldn't cry. We shouldn't show our emotions. Those are his marching orders. That's how he feels about, the experience of being a man. He didn't just believe that at the end. He believed that his entire life.
Right.
As portrayed in the movie.
Yeah, and I think one of the really interesting things there is the stigma about talking about depression is something I know that we'll revisit over and over and over again as we talk about movies, because we're just now in the in the 2020s starting to really combat stigma and being able to
there's still a stigma, and these guys were around
absolutely
in the 70s and the 80s. That was a completely
there was a lot of stigma about a lot of things in the 80s.
Yes indeed. I think I mentioned this. I just saw Killers of the Flower Moon, and I thought it was really interesting that they mentioned melancholia, or he had a case of the melancholy, and that was clearly a nod to the audience to be like, this guy's depressed, but they didn't use that word back then, but they still wanted the audience to know. I thought that was a really good piece of screenwriting. So let's talk about the characters. Let's talk about Kevin to start, because he's the main character in this. What little I know, I thought that they did an incredible job of showing him as a depressed person. What were your thoughts on Kevin?
Yeah, I thought Zac Efron did a fabulous job of just kind of portraying a guy who, when he first was on the screen, the first few minutes, I looked at it and, I knew that depression was a central theme of this movie, but I looked at him and went, oh man, that guy's flat. If he's not depressed already, he is a perfect setup for one. He's just got a flat affect. There's not a lot that really gets him going. And, people can have flat affects and not be depressed. But as he went on, they sure did a nice job of having the hallmark symptoms of depression start to build in him. He started to isolate more and more, especially after David's death. He got more withdrawn. He had poor performance at work. There's that really striking.
I love that poor
where,
performance at work. Because his job is a professional wrestler.
Right.
But there's that scene where, he at the, towards the end where he kind of wants to tag in, but he doesn't. And then the guy, the guy wins and he's like, oh yeah, that's great. That's the poor performance at work, but just their work was so different than ours.
Perfect portrayal of mailing it in, and perfect portrayal of mailing it in the midst of a depressive episode. I thought that was really, really good.
Yeah, and again, it's that tough line between. I mean, his brother had just died, and it's like, what is depression and what is sadness, and that's actually something I would love for you to clear up. Like, after a traumatic episode, are you depressed or are you just sad for a long time? Like, we've had parents who have died, and I certainly was sad for a long time. Does that mean that I was depressed to the point where I needed, some sort of help? Not just talking to somebody, beyond talking to somebody. Like, what should I have, been on a drug for something like that?
Yeah. No, everybody who loses a parent or everybody has a death in the family shouldn't run out and get on antidepressants. Absolutely not. Grieving is normal. It is a part of life. You lose people, you grieve. And in Western medicine and in psychiatry, there's absolutely a distinction between that. Where it gets tricky is if it starts to last for a really long time, starts to really impact in a lasting fashion your functioning, and of course, if you start to have thoughts of suicide or wanting to die, that's not considered a part of normal grieving, and that's when someone needs to go get help. But yeah, and this is where it gets super tricky, because again, depression and many mental illnesses are normal emotions heightened to a maladaptive degree.
Right.
And grieving's normal. People should grieve. You have to grieve. You have to be sad about your loved ones dying. I mean, that's a normal part of life.
Yeah.
Something I want
to make clear too of something you've said, and this is something I believe I might be wrong. You can correct me on this. It's not just.
I will.
Thank you. Yes. It's not just like feeling like you might kill yourself. It's because, I've battled some demons. When I started thinking about like, the world would be better off if I was just dead. It wasn't that I wanted to kill myself. It was just like, I started having these feelings of like, hey, what would it be like if I was dead? That's a point where I should have picked up the phone immediately. Not do I have a plan, not, these other things. It was just the thoughts of what would the world be like without me. I think at that point, I should have called somebody. I should have had, someone, I should have gotten help at that point.
Yeah, I think so too. Does that mean that you have to, run to the emergency room at that point? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that you need to reach out and ask, a friend or your doctor or somebody, hey, why am I having these thoughts? Why is this going on? And then explore them and talk about them. If we're talking about stuff out in the open, a lot less suicide's going to happen.
Yeah. I believe that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the dad, because he was in some ways my favorite character. One, I love that actor, and if you haven't seen Mindhunters, go watch Mindhunters. He's fantastic. I love that character. He also has a very fine, interesting but short-lived turn as the warden in the second season of Foundation. Yeah, nobody watches Foundation. That's. Yeah.
Okay. Well, people should watch Foundation. Lee Pace is in it. It's pretty damn great.
All right.
It's all and we should actually talk about that sometime, because you want to talk about psychohistory. That is a fabulous concept.
Yeah. So for the 6 people who watch that show, this would be that fascinating episode for them.
Right. Click this link that doesn't exist, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I loved the dad. I thought it was super interesting that they believe in this family curse. But at the same time, like, the dad, short of winning the championship, was going to believe in the family curse. And once again, I want to make sure that this is as it's portrayed in the movie. But when we cut to him in the future, he has a successful wrestling business. He's running one of the region's, best wrestling organizations. Like, you're doing okay. Bad things happen to people, but you're not doing that terribly. And so once again, it's going back to that like family curse thing of like feeling like you're cursed. It to me seems like that's the depression talking.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. Was the dad depressed? Was he dealing with depression at points throughout his life? Could he not see how successful he was because of the shadow of feeling worthless that depression brings on? I mean, very much could be. On the other hand, I mean, it also was, Texas's greatest wrestling show, and that actually, I think that kind of was a big deal at the time. I remember, we grew up near the Portland area. There was Portland wrestling. There was the local Portland wrestling on Channel 12. So yeah, I guess that was a thing about the same time before WWE and NWA gobbled everything up. Yeah, interesting point. Was he depressed?
I don't remember Portland wrestling at all.
Oh, it was pretty great.
Yeah,
pretty great.
Did you go see it? I'm sure that's something Dad would have taken you to.
I never went to it. I think Tommy went to it.
Dad would drag us to those freaking dirt track races and all the rodeo stuff. Like, oh god, that was nuts. I saw monster trucks because of Dad. One time in my life, I went and saw monster trucks. Anyway, one of the things about the dad that this is more of a filmmaking thing than mental health, but I loved the scene where he's ranking his children.
Now, we all know Kerry's my favorite, then Kev, then David, then Mike. But the rankings can always change.
Yes,
I know that anybody watching that is probably like, oh my God, that's so cruel, that's so abusive, what a terrible father. I could have seen Dad doing that. And honestly, our parents did probably rank us. You just never ousted me from the top spot. But that's something that, like, I didn't see it as that bad. I thought it was a funny moment. I thought it was kind of a nice moment, for the family. I didn't think anybody took him seriously. The kids didn't seem all that affected by it. I don't know. There was one of those moments where I'm probably in the mass minority on thinking that was a terrible scene.
It was a really interesting storytelling choice because you're right. I think most people who saw that are like, "Oh, what a total dick!" I mean, you're ranking your kids. Of course, they're going to hate you. In the context of the world in which they lived, the wrestling world in which everything is ranked, I agree with you. I don't know if it was or not. I mean, you're the ranking right now. He's not saying you're my favorite child. He's saying 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. And it can change.
The rankings can always change.
The rankings can always change. I also thought another really interesting storytelling point, and I thought Zac Efron pulled it off very, very well, is how they explained the fakeness of wrestling when he was starting to woo his wife.
Yeah, he was talking to
like, but it's all fake, right? And he's like, no, it's not fake. It's like you get your title shot because you're really good and you've worked for it, and that's a reward. And then you get the title because as a reward, just like in other sports, you get the title as a reward for your hard work. I thought that was a really well put explanation of wrestling, and I appreciated it. And he did.
Yeah, I do too. And it sort of helps you. I loved wrestling back in the day. Honestly, I would probably still love wrestling if I had enough hours in the day to follow it. Right. But there's some fun storylines, and I watched during the time of The Rock and Steve Austin. It was awesome. And those guys, there's a reason they were the champions. They were the most interesting. It certainly follows what they said in the movie. Let's talk about Jerry Mellon White. Let's shift to him because I thought he was interesting in terms of, he, to me, seemed depressed throughout the movie, but he kills himself after the accident and after he's in a tremendous amount of pain, of physical pain. Yeah. So, in your opinion, was he depressed? Talk about that character because I thought that was fascinating.
I mean, it's certainly not a stretch to jump to the conclusion that he was depressed. Was I able to put together enough, pieces from the brief portrayal of the character to say, oh, that's major depressive disorder? I wasn't, but it's not a leap to say that that wasn't what was going on.
Right.
What I thought was more impactful than depression for him was his pretty significant alcohol and substance use disorders that they showed throughout the movie. And they just kind of casually showed it. He was always drunk. He was always snorting something. He was the one, I think, that was mostly using what we were led to believe was steroids. He had serious drug and alcohol problems, which are they absolutely exacerbate depression and vice versa. So those pieces were difficult for me to pull away from his suicide. Just how much he was using throughout the movie.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this because it sort of has to do with him, but the portrayal of heaven in the movie.
Oh God.
I was so annoyed by that. Him hopping down. I was like, ooh, I got my foot back. And then, it goes and swims out or rides the boat out to his brothers. I hated that scene.
It pissed me off. It really pissed me off because I thought that it glorified suicide. We don't know what happens when you die. We certainly don't know what happens when you kill yourself. What we do know is that far from whatever fantasy there is about meeting up with your dead brothers, who, by the way, went to heaven at the time they aged, or
right.
at the age in which they died.
Right.
What we do know
don't
is
die
that,
when you're 80, or you'll just be hobbling around in heaven your whole life
right.
for eternity.
Well, what we absolutely do know is that when you commit suicide, you leave behind devastated family and friends that never ever get over it. So I didn't care for that storytelling point, and I didn't think it added much to the story either.
No, the only saving grace for the scene, and I thought about it later, was they cut right back to Zac Efron, and so I think what they intended was Zac Efron was imagining heaven. And so that was what he imagined his brothers got to do, and so that he could imagine them all together, and so it would make him feel better to imagine heaven that way, which is fine. But I don't think that it landed. I think that it was more your take on it, which was a glorification of suicide in the afterlife versus that's what Zac Efron believed. I didn't think that landed well enough to have that scene in the movie. Also, you mentioned this to me. This isn't something I learned, but I thought it was really interesting that Jeremy Allen White, they took license with when that character was going to go to the Olympics. He was wrestling well before the Olympics was canceled in real life. And I don't have a problem with that in biopics when they take some license with the timeline so that you can have a very clear sort of inciting incident to somebody's life. But I thought that was very interesting because, it adds to the sort of sadness and the curse to kind of bring him into the world of wrestling because, he was cursed because if that was his dream.
Yeah, I agree with you. It did. In fact, that was probably the beginning of the end of Kevin being the top dog in Dad's eye. And again, as a storytelling point, okay, fine. If you're paralleling what happened in real life, that's not quite the timeline. But again, storytelling license. I will challenge you, Jeff, as a screenwriter. Is it Hollywood's duty? Is it the screenwriter's duty to tell things truthfully as they happen? I think it's
emotionally truthful. It's our job to tell things
emotionally truthful. Oh,
no, I'm dead. I'm dead serious, and it is absolutely not Hollywood's job. You can look those things up. But no, it's not. It's not the job of Hollywood to tell things exactly as they happened. It is our job to speak emotional truths and to tell stories that change people. And there's a best way to do that. There's a best practices for how to do that. And that's our job is to highlight the emotions and highlight the change and the instruments of change in people's lives. So take that, Dr. Jones.
Oh, I'm sorry, I drifted off there.
You're an asshole, but you're my favorite asshole. So there we go.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think we just expose ourselves to the viewers a little bit too, and I think there's another reason why, you picked this one is that it's about brothers and brothers' relationships with each other and with their dads. And
oh man,
we don't need to pull at that. We don't need to pull at that thread quite yet.
I just mean the end of the movie.
We'll probably do. Oh yeah.
Just the end of the movie when he's just like,
I used to be a brother, and now I'm not a brother anymore.
oh my God, if I ever need to cry, I can put on Wreck-It Ralph, Inside Out, or now The Iron Claw. Like those are my like I will definitely cry movies.
Or Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams for me.
Yeah.
You want a game of catch? I sure do. Like right now, please.
That's fantastic. Let's talk about the middle brother. I mean, maybe he's the middle brother. Just the brother who was into music.
Oh yeah, Mike. I think he was I think he was the youngest brother actually.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting about his was, and again, like all of the brothers had their own sort of issue that was highlighted. And his issue being he really wanted to be an artist, but then he got dragged into the world. And then the filmmakers made it look like this one incident of him not being able to play his music is what sort of leads him to kill himself. I thought that was an interesting portrayal. I don't buy that that's the whole story when someone, wants to kill themselves or is depressed. Talk to me about that character a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that it's ever really one thing that leads someone to kill themselves. I mean, there may be an example where that happens to somebody, but it's a buildup. It's a cascade, and I think his cascade really started after his anoxic brain injury or lack of oxygen to the brain after his shoulder injury, and during that surgery. I mean, they clearly showed by the fact that he couldn't form words as well that he developed some kind of brain injury from that, and that led into his inability to play his music. And as you said, the storytellers wanted us to draw the dots to his suicide. But if you get an anoxic brain injury like that, all bets are off. It's very difficult to predict how you might change, how your personality might change. You are more prone to depression. You are more prone to substance use. A whole bunch of really, really nasty effects. And that's where I think probably started and led to the cascade. Now, I think with the whole family curse, was he depressed even before that?
Right.
I think there's a pretty fair bet. At least the character was.
Yeah,
they were all just down and dour, with the exception of David. David had some life in him. David was also the one that I don't think showed any signs of depression, and he died because his intestine ruptured. Yeah, which again, it's just that, like, I mean, poor Zac Efron. This is again where, like, this is just the movie. Don't know if this was the actual way it happened, but him just the screenwriters gave him a reason to feel guilty for every one of his brother's deaths. That's right. Yeah.
And like, that's just, I mean, that is so brutal. But the scene where he's in the bathroom and he tells him, like, "Oh, I'm not feeling so good." It's like, but don't tell anybody. I mean, how do you come back from that? Like, that's that was.
Look, I think Zac Efron did a fabulous job. He just did. It was great.
Yeah.
And just shredded.
Yes. I don't want to get that shredded, but, like, that's pretty awesome. It's just awesome. Like, good for him. Like, and how do you then get all the guys who like Christian Bale and those guys who go through those massive changes? It just boggles my mind how they're able to do it like that. It's just, I mean, people who are trying to be bodybuilders can't get that jacked. It's nuts. And then I think the last character to talk about is the mom. Maura Tierney, incredible actress. Did a fantastic job. I thought showed some moments of showing that she wasn't part of the Von Ehrlich male line, but I think that she might have brought some depression into the family.
Well, it sure seemed that way. I mean, she was a very dour character. She played it expertly well. Very difficult for me to engender a whole lot of dislike for any Maura Tierney character. I've always thought she's a fabulous actress. So people are like, "Ah, she was really depressed." It's like, "Oh, I didn't see that. I thought she was pretty great." No, but yeah, clearly that character was very down and emotionally distant. Anytime one of the boys brought an issue to her, she would just say, "That's between you and your brothers."
Yeah.
Not ideal. Pretty tough. But also, I think we can extrapolate how difficult it must have been to be married to that difficult father character. Yeah, and I did appreciate the.
I love it in movies where they give you a range and somebody isn't all bad or all good, and so this wasn't a terrible father or a good father. They just portray him as a complex father, and there's a scene where they dance at the wedding, and they're very happy, and it looks like a healthy marriage in that moment, and then there's times where it doesn't look like a healthy marriage, and I love that full range of that's great character building. It's great character development. I thought they just did a great job. So overall, tell me. Kind of wrap up your thoughts on Iron Claw. Did they nail it? Did they do a good job? Or did they do a responsible job?
Did they do a responsible job? I think they did a pretty dang good job of making a movie that men will talk about depression.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think it makes it okay. Again, I agree. I don't know that they actually said depression at any point in the movie, but there was enough buzz around it. You kind of knew what it was about, and I think that's pretty good. So yeah, I think they did a good job. They did a good job of portraying complexity of characters in a world that I think a wrestling world that gets painted as very one-dimensional at times.
Right.
So I thought that was really, really good. I do think that they, and you and I talked about this when we were pre-briefing, I do think they failed the Bechdel test.
Yes. Yeah.
Maura Tierney was a great character. The wife was actually a pretty good character. Kevin's wife. Yep, she was a good character. They interacted without the men in the room one time, and it was about a dress to the wedding. And I think those two actresses deserve more than that.
Yeah, especially Lily James. Like, I didn't think that she was there to do much other than just help with exposition. And she's such a great actress that it's like, you give her more to do. Like, she's very, and just, in general, let's write women better. Let's write women more dynamically, and et cetera, et cetera.
And then I don't know that I can give the movie a totally unqualified mental health thumbs up because of that afterlife scene around the suicide. I just think that was. I'm not even totally sure what they were going for, but I thought it was too irresponsible for me to say, yep, this is one you should hold up as great mental health filmmaking.
Yeah, that's fair. I think they were trying to make it, what Zac Efron was hoping the afterlife looked like, but I agree with you. I didn't love it. Okay, well, that's it for us this week. Next week we are talking about Silence of the Lambs. Is that what we decided?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll
fabulous movie.
We'll get away from too heavy of a topic in terms of sort of personal stuff, and we'll just talk about psychopaths. Psychopaths and serial killers.
Good old-fashioned serial
killers.
Let's get into it. I mean, everybody loves that. Well, hey, I want to mention the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number 988. Again, you can call or text that at any time. Honest to God, folks, I think this is one of the greatest things that our country has done since 911. It's the 988 number. Please call it if you're in distress. The folks that man those lines are pretty freaking awesome. So big shout out to those folks who are on those lines as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's it for us this week. Next week we're doing Silence of the Lambs. Follow us on any of the places where you get your podcasts. We're going to be on Spotify. We're going to be on Apple. And then if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. Put the bell. All the things that people tell you to do. You should do those things for us. We're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff. Bipolar. We're going to talk about psychopaths. We're gonna really
dementia, schizophrenia, autism. We'll do it. We'll do it all.
Yep, and then we'll probably do it
again. Once we get rolling and we get comments in, we'll do what you all want to hear about too.